Okay, this presentation is on Dada art or Dadaism, they call the movement. This is located in your later Europe in the Americas content unit. I want to start off with a quote that was kind of infamous for the members of the Dada movement. And they would often say Dada is anti-Dada. And I really think that that sums it all up, what this mentality and what this movement was about, and then how they used kind of art as their way to communicate. But the members of the Dada movement were so intent on opposing all norms of bourgeois culture that the group would claim that they're barely in favor of themselves. So it's very kind of metacognitive. It's very advanced kind of philosophical thinking, extremely anti-establishment, and is really the start of pure conceptual art. So let's talk more about the Dada movement and what its characteristics are. First of all, the exact translation of Dadaism is actually a nonsense term, and it translates to hobby horse. So there's a lot of different stories on how that term came about. One of the stories is that one of the members of the movement, just kind of randomly opened up a dictionary and stuck his pencil in it and landed on Dadaism. So that is one of many stories, but it is supposed to be kind of a nonsense term. The actual movement began in Zurich, Switzerland, starting around 1916. And it started as like kind of a backroom area in a club for artists called the Cabaret Voltaire. And this club welcomed many forward-thinking, creative artists. Like most of these movements that we've been learning about, it is a visual art movement, it is a literary movement, musical, dramatics. So you have all of these creative outlet people gathering, philosophizing, and working together. So this is the exact place where it started. The Dada movement was definitely inspired by past movements such as Cubism, Futurism, Fauvism, Constructivism, Expressionism. So all of those movements directly prior to the Dada movement had, of course, influence. It was kind of like a stair step that was happening during this entire content area, taking one more risk and then one more risk with each movement that goes on. Technically, this movement arose as a direct reaction to World War I and the nationalism that was thought responsible for, leading to the war. That is what these group of artists and creative people were literally protesting. But again, protesting in kind of metacognitive, philosophical, and artistic ways. The Dadaists rejected conventional methods of representation and the traditional manner in which they were exhibited. So what we have happening here is not just artists that are kind of anti, academia and, anti kind of sticking with the conventional way of making art, but they're even questioning the traditional manner in which art is exhibited. So this group of artists was highly focused on the exhibition and on the event. So when you have all of this artwork and you're putting them into some type of showing, that in and among itself was important to the Dadaists and how that evening unveiled. Traditionally, in the past, these kind of art shows, whether it be at the Salon or at some sort of museum, the Louvre, the gallery, whatever, was very kind of pristine. and almost in an upper class type of setting, and the Dadaists wanted to challenge that. Another characteristic of the Dada movement is oil and canvas were completely abandoned. It was just absolutely tiring to them. They were unimpressed, overdone, and really looking for kind of non-traditional ways to use their visual voices. The output then, if they abandoned oil and canvas, the output was extremely diverse. And this is a huge part of the Dada movement, is they're starting to really explore non-traditional mediums. So they would range from performance art, poetry, but then photography was really kind of stepping up to the plate and becoming its own type of art form. Photography was also at this time turning into film as art form. Sculpture was happening. Painting was still happening, but not in a traditional manner. Collage was becoming extremely important now that we have these capabilities of photographs and printing capabilities. We have magazines and posters and flyers and things like that that are mass produced. Using those materials to kind of cut them up, deconstruct and reconstruct was becoming a very popular art form. And then it was the Dadaists really that brought this ready-made form, or sometimes called found object, into the spectrum of mediums. And we will talk more about that. I wanted to take a minute and introduce you to Hugo Ball and Emmy Hemmings, because Hugo Ball really is the one that is credited with kind of the father of the Dadaist movement. And he was the one that put together this club, the Cabaret Voltaire. And I have an image down here that is the actual club that was housed. And over here to the right, this is kind of like your founding members of the Dada movement. And I've added this photo just to kind of make this reality easier to understand, that these art movements happening in 20th century Europe and kind of spreading over to the Americas, they were small, influential groups of people. They were colleagues and friends that were getting together and making really big changes. And they were committed to this type of ideology, and they were kind of movers and shakers. They had these thoughts and they had these really progressive ideas and visions, and then they would bring it to life. They would make it happen. And they started to, establish a culture, and then this culture would grow and it would move into, other popular cities, and then it would kind of morph, and other schools of thought would grow out of it. But I think that it is really important to understand that we're starting with a small group of people. And I think that just goes to show that everyone and anyone can make a really huge difference. I mean, look where we are now in 2018. And we're talking about this group of people today in an AP College Board class. And to be able to make history in that way from just such a small group of people getting together and, collecting their ideals and their thoughts, I think is very inspirational. But back to some more characteristics about the Dada movement. The aesthetic of Dada art was definitely marked by its mockery. Mockery specifically of materialistic and nationalistic attitudes. And that proved to be a really powerful influence on artists in many cities. So talking about spreading and growing, this Dada movement spread to Germany and really flourished in Berlin for quite some time. also other cities in Germany, such as Köln and Bonn, and Hanover. But it also took off in Paris, and you kind of had a group or a school of Dada artists practicing in Paris. New York really ate it up. New York absolutely devoured the Dada movement. Some of our most influential American artists came from this time period. And like I said, they would kind of generate their own groups in all of these different, major cities. So back to the ready-mades, the Dadaists accepted ready-mades as an art form. And oftentimes they would use traditional, non-traditional materials such as glass. So this is probably the largest innovation of this movement, is taking a found object, so an everyday mundane object that already exists, and calling that art, turning that into art. So what was happening is they were really not only challenging, the concept of art and what art is, but even the role of the artist. I mean, now we're talking about artwork that doesn't even have to be handmade by the artist. So this was a huge growth in conceptualization. And in my opinion, it really is the foundation of conceptual art. The Dada movement challenged the relationship between words and images, often incorporating words prominently into their works, and this is a big part of collage. So with the introduction of print, newspapers, magazines, things like that, a lot of font and collaging was happening. But also remember, this is political art as well. We're dealing with the onset of World War I. And so a lot of this art was kind of, propaganda type of art. You're able to chop up headlines from newspapers and incorporate, some heavy and disturbing words into your artwork. So that was a huge part of Dada art as well. The other thing is that technically the movement dissipated with the establishment of surrealism. So like all of our other movements, they would just continue to grow and morph. It was to me, this time period in Europe, it was like another Renaissance, where it was an awakening. It was an awakening of the artists and an awakening of creativity and innovation. And so it was like one idea was just happening after another. And then the other thing about the Dada movement is it completely accepts the dominance of the artistic concept over the actual execution. And we've already talked about that, but that is something that needs to stick with you in this presentation. That artistic concept overruled actual execution. So here I'm just kind of showing you a map. These were the areas heavily influenced by Dadaism, and these were cities that started their own groups and carried different schools of this movement. So we have Zurich here is kind of the epicenter where it all started. This is Switzerland, by the way. Like I said, Berlin was just humongous, and other areas in Germany. Paris absolutely ate it up. It was Paris, as you see in later Europe in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, really became quite the creative center and a place where a lot of these risque art forms were taking place. And New York, a lot of what was happening here in Europe just boomed and flourished in New York as well. So I'm giving you some artworks that are not in our AP book that are famous Dada artworks, just to kind of give you a little taste. But right here, this is Hugo Ball. And so this is a photograph of himself, and he is dressed in costume. So he was extremely artistic, but more in the literary sense. He had also done a lot of kind of spoken word and performance art, and one of the things he's known for is they're called sound poems. And so oftentimes he would kind of create these costumes in order to perform these sound poems. And these performances would take place at, the Cabaret Voltaire. And like I said, it was a place for all different types of art forms. Here is a famous Marcel Duchamp. He has taken a ready-made here, so probably, a print, a reproduction of the Mona Lisa. I am quite confident that he did not paint the Mona Lisa. I'm quite confident that he only added the mustache and beard to this already existing print. Here we have Jean Arp. This person really took control over the Dada movement kind of in the German region. This person was known for doing a lot of geometric works, a lot of collage and paint, but almost minimalistic, which was definitely before the time of minimalism. This is Hannah Hawk, and this is all collage. So images that have been photographs or taken from magazines or newspapers. And then here you can see the incorporation of print and font. So kind of weaving images and text together. And then here we have painter artist Max Ernst. And once we learn about surrealism, you'll be able to really see a connection between Max Ernst and the surrealist movement. So we have one image organizer for this content area, and it is called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp, and it is image 144 in your AP book. It was originally made in 1917, and it's a ready-made glazed china with black paint. And if you are not sure what you are looking at, you are looking at a urinal. Okay. So because this is a ready-made, form and content are going to be kind of bare here. Technically the content, it's a urinal. Okay. That's pretty much the subject matter here. So it's a ready-made sculpture, or again, you can call it a found object. It is placed on its back side. So where you see the drains here, right, typically that would be the bottom of the urinal, and then this here would be mounted to the wall. So it was intentionally put on its backside for display. There is a signature down here, and that is where the black paint comes in. So really, this is all that Marcel Duchamp added by hand. And the signature says R. Mutt, which is a pun from a Mutt and Jeff comic strip from the early 1900s. So Mutt and Jeff was kind of, just a comic strip that, was a lot like the Laurel and Hardy. It was witty, extremely witty and satirical. And this was just a little pun or twist that he put on his art here. There was indeed a second version of this made in 1950. It was an exact replica, but I included the image here from 1917. Okay, so the context of this art piece. It's conceptual. So the concept of the fountain itself, it's a pun. It's witty, it's satirical. A fountain spouts liquid, whereas a urinal is meant to collect it, so it is kind of a word pun. It's also very tongue-in-cheek, and it's a response to all the kind of grand fountains and sculptures created during Renaissance and Baroque times. So a lot of this art is really kind of denouncing all of that establishment art, all of the art that was extremely regimented and academic, and constrained by either royalty or religion. So this is like a true kind of break freedom. Irony was also added to it by placing it upside down for display purposes. And really, the intrigue here is that it was guaranteed and intentional to challenge and offend viewers. Interesting that in the history of this piece, when Marcel entered it into one of the first art shows, it was a non-juried art show, but it was completely rejected. They wouldn't even let him enter it or display it. But that was kind of the push here. That was kind of the point. By removing the urinal from its everyday environment and placing it in an art context, Duchamp was questioning basic definitions of art as well of the role of the artist in creating it. So that's the whole purpose here. That's the whole context. The innovation really is that this is true conceptual art. The execution by the artist is just removed from the equation. If we had to name some conventions and traditions, it's rebellious art. It's another step in the anti-establishment art, which has been happening all throughout time, but maybe not to this degree. And it's a continuation of the advancement of the artist's voice, which has been happening in 19th and 20th century art. The theme is that it's definitely political art. It's sculpture. Political art in the sense that, again, it's anti-establishment, but it's also social art. So sociologically, we're challenging the norms, and that's a big kind of push for a social movement. When I compared them to two artworks for the same reason. First is The Swing, and the second is Olympia. And I chose it because for their time, The Swing and Olympia were subject matters that really flirted with some taboo subject matter. And I feel that is still what's happening here. Again, Duchamp was looking to offend viewers, and even though that may have not been the intention of The Swing or Olympia, we're using kind of taboo and things that are subject matters that are supposed to be behind closed doors. So I found a relationship between that. All right, so I just want to summarize some main points. If you walk away understanding anything about Dadaism, I really want it to be these points. So again, it's the first conceptual art movement. The focus of the artist was not on crafting anything aesthetically pleasing, but making works that often upended bougie sensibilities and that generated difficult questions about society. So this was art that was supposed to make you think and was supposed to make you question and question difficult things about the artist, about society, about the purpose of art. This is avant-garde in its most extreme. This is really on the cusp of modernism. Again, remember the founding place, the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, and that the cabaret was named after a French satirist, Voltaire, who completed this novel called The Candide, which mocked the idiocies of society. And so Hugo Ball, the guy that started the Dada movement, he would claim that this is our Candide against the times. So again, this is extremely rebellious art politically and socially. Artists like Hans Arp were intent on incorporating chance into the creation of works of art. So this is kind of hard to understand, but I think it's important. This went against all norms of traditional art production, whereby when you made a piece of art, right, it was from start to finish, it was meticulously planned, executed, and then completed, and then, right, put into an art show. But with the Dadaists, the introduction of chance was really welcomed, and it challenged the artistic norms, again, to question the role of the artist. So here's an example. If we created this sculpture, and on the way to, bring this sculpture to an art show, it fell and it broke, then the artist, the Dada artist, would pick up those pieces and display it as broken. And they would embrace this circumstance that happened. They would embrace the execution of chance. Whereas your traditional artist would be like, oh my God, it's destroyed, it's ruined, it's no good. And last, the Dada artists were known for their use of ready-made objects. We've talked about that a lot, but you really need to make a connection between found objects and Dadaism. We're going to see a lot more of ready-mades, but this was the start of it.